Okay, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
So we've been trying to do this podcast for I think a while. Like we've been just bouncing messages back and forth, and every time you've been telling me about this project that you're working on, which I'm really excited to hear about maybe later. But before we get into that, like maybe you can just tell the audience about your game Hangline that I think you want to share like a little bit about the background of and your own background as well, like how you got into the game industry and things like that.
Yeah, sure. Well, Hangline's the first game I've made kind of since going indie, really. And I did it mostly by myself with the help of a couple of contractors here and there. But yeah, I've been around for quite a long time before that, making games, but mostly for like AAA companies, really. Console games mostly. But yeah, Hangline's the first mobile game that I've done, really.
Like by yourself as like a
Yeah,
solo developer, I guess.
yeah. And now I'm busy working on a PC game.
Interesting. Yeah, like the way that I kind of found out about you was you were posting all this, I think, really interesting content. I think one of your first blog posts about being a solo developer was in 2017. Like, can you tell us about kind of how it came to be that you wanted to do like this indie game stuff and how you kind of transitioned from AAA into indie game development?
Yeah, well, I was moving around quite a bit through working at different companies, and I guess that was mostly brought about by studios kind of either being bought by a bigger studio or closing down from a game being either cancelled or just not performing as well as it should. So I mean, a lot of people that work in console games are sort of fairly familiar with that cycle that can happen, where you just end up looking for a new job every few years because you might have been on a project that didn't succeed or whatever. So that after a while was getting a little bit tiring. So it was kind of the point where I was starting to think about doing my own thing was when I was at LucasArts, and the parent company Lucasfilm had got bought by Disney. So we were working on a Star Wars game at the time and put a few years of development into that, and it was it was almost done. But then the Disney acquisition happened, and then they just decided to cancel the projects in production, and that was that. And so, yeah, that was sort of the last straw for me, really, because it was really like a dream to work at LucasArts, and so I was a huge fan of like the old games like X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and Dark Forces and so on. So, that was like a dream for a very long time. So then when it kind of came true, but then got sort of crushed, it definitely left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. And that was kind of the point where I thought, maybe I should, think about doing things a bit differently. And it was kind of that combined with just when I was looking for jobs at that point in time, most of the console side of games, like the big budget AAA stuff, it was mostly just sort of sequels and prequels and kind of just continuations of an existing IP. So it was just starting to get less interesting to work on as a designer, because it's just less creative, basically. So that was kind of the point I was at, where I was starting to think, maybe I should look at just going down a different path.
Yeah, so you kind of hinted at it. Were you like a game designer or an art designer, or what kind of role did you have in these studios?
Yeah, I've mostly been a designer. Right at the beginning, I started off as a programmer. I did that for about a year, and I'd done programming at university. Well, done computer science. But then, I've been a designer since then, really. I think I started in level design and like level scripting, and then did some kind of more like technical design roles. And then, then sort of moved up steadily to be like a lead designer, really. That was kind of the path that I'd gone down. But I did, obviously once I decided to do my own thing, there was a lot of other skills I had to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would find really interesting is kind of to know you ended up making Hangline, which is like a mobile game, um, and that's quite different to like a triple A game. I think you also kind of mentioned that in your blog post that you would have never thought to make like a mobile game. So I really kind of want to know what was the decision process that you had there when you were coming up with your game idea as well. Like you just were left LucasArts. How did that kind of game idea cement into Hangline?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was really quite a practical decision because, yeah, my experience was in console games, not mobile. But from the point of view of like making a game by yourself, to me, it seemed like the sort of best path to success at that point in time was to try mobile because the kind of games, like the scope of games, was generally smaller, as in you could make something and potentially get like a feature on the App Store, even as quite a small game. Whereas I just thought, sort of on PC or other platforms, it just wasn't as just didn't seem as feasible. And I'd also, after LucasArts, I did work at sort of a smaller developer. That was kind of like, as I say, the turning point where I sort of moved away from AAA. And we did kind of work on like a small mobile game at one point, just as a sort of kind of an experiment, really. And so that gave me a little bit of experience at that point as to, getting an understanding of what kind of effort is required to ship something on mobile. So it was, yeah, it was really just a practical decision, to be honest, and it also just felt like that was the best chance of kind of making some money as well, making some return at that point in time, because as a developer, sort of by yourself with not much marketing power, it was at the time it was quite it wasn't super hard to make a game that could get a feature on the store and then get in the eyes of a lot of people. So it was, yeah, it was also from that point of view as well. It just seemed like the right thing to do. But the actual game idea was more, yeah, it was kind of came from, I guess, just me climbing around on various boulders on the beach and kind of thinking this could be an interesting game. And then sort of, I think it was also from the touch interface on like a phone. It felt like it could be a cool way to control a climber. Like it could be, it felt to me like an interesting way to control, or an interesting way to sort of use the touch controls to kind of do a climbing mechanic. So it was really from that kind of point of view, like the game mechanic of climbing, like how would that work on mobile? And that was kind of, yeah, that was like the very start of it. But then I gradually, like I sort of moved away from traditional climbing because it just felt like I couldn't seem to find a mechanic that worked well. And I did check like a bunch of other games on mobile, and like there were quite a few climbing games, and they were all pretty awful. Like the controls felt awful, and they were similar to control ideas I had in my head. So I was like, maybe this isn't a great plan. But then eventually, I just stumbled upon the idea of giving the guy a grappling hook, and then just literally pointing where you wanted to go, and that just seemed to click and just work really well. And I've always been a fan of physics games, so it just seemed a natural fit to have this, this elastic sort of physics action.
Yeah, interesting. Can you give us like a production timeline if that's still possible? I mean, maybe it's too long ago, but like, how long did it take you for you to come up with that core mechanic, and then versus the entirety of like the game taking to develop?
So the mechanic, really not very long. In terms of like the idea and kind of in general coming up with the ideas for the game, that was a pretty short period of time. Only like, I don't know, say like a few weeks whilst I was working on some different stuff, because I did a little bit of contract work at the time. But yeah, I actually had, I think it was 3 different game ideas that I was interested in, like because the way I work is I generally am writing down sort of ideas over like quite a long period of time, and writing down sort of simple one-line descriptions of like game concepts, and then at some point I'll sort of take those and start looking at them and pick the ones that I think are the most interesting, and then maybe assemble them into a smaller list of, say, I think when it came to Hangline, it was about 10 different ideas that I had. Then I think I narrowed those down to like kind of a top three, by just seeing really what was sort of the most feasible to produce, which ones I thought was the best fit for mobile, and so on. And then I think I had three different ones. That Hangline was one of them, and my goal was to prototype all three and just see which one worked the best. So I spent about like a week on the kind of core mechanic for Hangline first, which was this swinging mechanic. And so within a week, it felt like this kind of could work, and I didn't bother prototyping the other ones. Basically, I just stuck with that. But from then to soft launch, that was a year and a half before the first soft launch in India.
Wow, wow. And then how did the metrics look like?
Well, to begin with, like they were okay. Like as in, well, I didn't get many installs because I was sort of using this sort of publishing service where they take your game and kind of trial it out, and so they give you something like 500 to 1,000 installs, as in they do a little bit of advertising in their own existing games so that you can get some installs, and then they'll track the metrics to see how you're doing, and then potentially give you some publishing deal later down the line. But so I got with them about like 500 downloads, so it wasn't very many, but it was enough to kind of like look at the telemetry a bit and try to understand how the game was doing. But the game, it was performing okay in terms of engagement, but the retention wasn't that great, and there's clearly like quite a lot of things to improve on. But at that point, that was like when it got pirated, basically.
Okay, well, can you tell us a little bit about that? That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, well, it was kind of crazy. So first of all, I was just like looking at the statistics each day, as you do, because you sort of been working on something for a while, and then you're kind of so curious to like see who, are people playing it, and are they enjoying it? And then, it just seemed to, like, at one point I was looking at the Unity telemetry data, and it went from like 500 installs to like 5,000, just like overnight. And I thought, oh, that's quite a jump. Like, why has that happened? And then I was looking in the Google Play console, and it still said 500 installs. And I was like, that's weird. Why are the two, telemetry, stats showing different numbers? Then I looked into it and I started filtering by country, and then I saw that like in the Unity telemetry, like most of the installs were coming from Russia. And I was like, well, it's not out in Russia. It's I'm trialing it in India, and then I obviously realized it's in Russia because someone's pirated it, and that's why it's not showing in the official Google data. So at that point, it was quite a weird thing, right? Because you're making, I was making a free to play game, right? It makes money through adverts and in-app purchases. So like, what does pirating even mean, right? Like pirating a free game, like, is that a big deal? But it is, because when you pirate something and then you put it in a different country, like the game might not have ad networks that country supports. And it also means in-app purchases don't work as well. So it is kind of a big deal in the sense of the game doesn't really perform well if it gets pirated, if that makes sense. But I was still happy that at least someone wanted to play it. That was that was at least nice. But then about a week later, the same thing happened again. Like overnight, the installs jumped, but this time they went to like 500,000. So it went crazy, and this time it wasn't Russia; it was actually China. Somehow it appeared on some Chinese website, and just tons of people had started playing it. So this was like really crazy. And then shortly afterwards, a publisher in China actually got in touch with me, and really wanted to publish it, basically. And yeah, I already knew about them because they'd also worked on Rodeo Stampede and Crossy Road. So it was, yeah, it was sort of like not just a random publisher, as it were. So yeah, so that's kind of that's where things took off really because we negotiated like a deal that we were all happy with, and then from then on sort of improved the game, and then finally released it. Actually, almost a year later. Once made various improvements to it. So
That's really interesting. I was actually wondering. I think you're talking about Yodo One as the publisher there from China. I was actually wondering if you were the testing it with them as well, as in those early tests, but that was with a different publishing offer than where you were doing the free.
yeah, the early one was with just a completely separate publisher, and that was sort of just a little trial thing, really. It wasn't like a deal that you signed on or anything. It was literally someone giving you a few installs to then see, how the game worked, really.
So could you see from your analytics, like what was kind of the thing that people really liked the most about the game, which might have led to its virality in China, or was there any kind of discussion with Yodo One that might have led you to understand like how it became so successful?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly. I think it was mostly the core mechanics because it was simple to play but hard to master. I guess the kind of classic thing. It's like you just tap the screen to play it, and the guy fires the grappling hook to wherever you tap. But then the physics of it make it very tricky to get really, really good at the game. So there's just a lot of finesse to the actual, to the navigation and the climbing. So I think that was the main thing. Also, like the graphics were sort of clean and kind of, I think, appealing, like colorful, fairly mass appeal sort of thing. And yeah, I think it was sort of yeah, it was a combo of those two really. I mean, it's hard to know when you've got like statistics. You're basically just looking at a load of numbers, seeing how many people installed or are playing, and so on. But the reviews might tell you a little bit about what they liked, but yeah, most of the time, the sort of stuff that really connects with them, it's not so easy to know exactly what it is. Um, you know, so yeah, tricky question.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I didn't really expect like a definite answer as well, for sure. One thing that would make that I find kind of curious, and I think you can like maybe answer in hindsight. Obviously, again, not with like 100% certainty, but like let's say the game wouldn't have gotten pirated. Like, what would have been like your next trajectory versus what actually happened? And you got, actually got this presumably very good deal. Like you were in a really great position to negotiate with publishers because you already know that the game had like viral potential and such. Like what would have been your next steps? Would you have also seeked out publishing, or what would have been your kind of?
Right, yeah. No, if that publishing opportunity didn't appear, my actual plan was to self-publish, and I had a contact at Apple that was already interested in the game, so I had a potential chance of getting a feature on the store. And yeah, my plan was to basically work on the improvements, based on the telemetry data, seeing what there was to improve and getting rid of difficulty spikes and so on, and then self-publish. I mean, to be honest, I didn't want to spend an awful lot longer on the game because I'd felt, I'd already sort of taken a year and a half on it. It was pretty draining. It was, the first game that I made by myself. There was masses of things to learn how to do, not just with like literally programming a game, but also learning all the intricacies of mobile and ad networks and ad mediation and progression systems and economies. And it's, there's a lot of stuff that was like took a while to learn and was really hard. So yeah, I was pretty much ready to sort of like, get it out there myself and see how it performed really. So yeah, I wasn't planning on getting a publisher. Most people had warned me against publishers on mobile because they the sort of general feeling was that they can take advantage of you a bit as a developer. Like, as in, if you've got a game that's sort of almost done, they might just kind of want to get in on that, get their sort of 50% cut or whatever it is of the revenue, and not really make much effort on marketing, and just kind of see if the game, gets picked up, as it were. So, like the key thing about the reason I went with, the Yoda One was because they had a track record of working with other studios, and they also they were intent on spending extra time and resources on the game and basically investing into it. That was the key thing.
So supporting you to continue developing for that extra year then, which is presumably longer than you.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting. Like I want to know, you hinted there as well that you kind of had to learn all of these different things, including everything like programming and such. So yeah, can you share us a little bit about like how you went about that? And, what tools did you use, and how did you kind of go about learning that? And yeah, what is kind of the biggest things that you learned?
Yeah, sure. So before I started making the game, and I was still working in a normal job, like I spent my evenings kind of just basically scratching up on the skills that I didn't have. So, like, at the bare minimum, I needed to be able to program. I needed to be able to make art of it in at least some style, right? So what I chose to do was learn a low poly texture style, because I've always kind of liked games that had that look, but also it just meant that I didn't have to learn texturing. So it seemed like at least it was something that I could focus on, and like kind of really narrow in on one thing. So I did a bunch of tutorials for Blender to learn Blender, and that was kind of what I did. I think for about 3 or 4 months, just working in the evenings. But it was a really fun and satisfying thing to do, to be honest, because when you're going through those tutorials, you feel yourself getting better. Like I actually took a screenshot of every single thing that I built, just so I could look back on it. And it's just like hilarious to see the progress. Like literally the first thing I made was this like terrible looking shark that just looked like it was made, like it was almost looked like a blow up shark, like made of rubber or something, with like this horrible shiny texture. It just looks so bad. But then, like over the period of like a few months, it gradually gets better and better and better. And then, the last one like I made was just like much more impressive. And it's really fun to look back on that progress. But yeah, like aside from that, I was just learning programming. So I had, obviously I started as a programmer many years ago, and then I'd sort of not touched programming for over 10 years. And then I did a little bit of programming at the sort of indie studio that I worked at, called Dynamite, after LucasArts. And I was doing that a little bit there, just kind of, I think that was really my first time using Unity as well. So that helped a bit, but I didn't, like to me, I didn't have the confidence to just go off and then make a game by myself. So what I did, again, whilst sort of working in my spare time, I also just made some really tiny little kind of a demo game, as it were, just like a prototype, really. It was actually a parking game, which I never took any further because it wasn't the most fun thing in the world. But it was, it's just a quick test to sort of like, see could I get my head around making something by myself, really. And it was helpful improving that, basically.
Do you also get some help from other people, like invest in the game to maybe speed up the development or something like this? By getting
No, not really. The only contract help that I got with Hangline, during that first year and a half was just I had a friend that did the music, and another friend that did sound effects. That was it, basically.
So like one of the challenges I think with making like a great free to play game, on the one hand it's like the gameplay needs to be great, but if the game is also free, it needs to be profitable, right? So you need to think about, like, on one hand, that trade-off between making like a fun game but also having some aspects of it that allow you to generate revenue. How was that like for you to learn as maybe someone coming from like the premium AAA game industry, and kind of how did you approach the monetization of the game? That's something you are willing to share.
Yeah, monetization is hard. Yeah, to be honest, I think I never really figured out how to do a good job of the in-app purchases. That side of it's quite basic, really. But the I did invest a lot of time into trying to figure out how to do a good implementation of ad mechanics. And a lot of it is just like playing tons of other games. Like every single week, I would download like all the new games that were appearing like in the featured list, on the App Store, and basically just downloading all the free games, trying them out, and seeing what systems they use, and looking at the most successful ones, like to see what strategies they used. And breaking that down and finding out a way to implement it in a way that made sense for Hangline, really. So yeah, a lot of it is the kind of like, if you fail a level, you can kind of retry from where you fell off. If you watch an ad, that's like basically from reading tons of articles and playing a ton of other free games, that was sort of like a very common strategy that was quite successful for getting people to watch an ad. And then there's various other things as well, like that I implemented, like at the end of the level, kind of watching now to get some bonus coins and things like that. So yeah, a lot of it is just literally analyzing the competition and figuring out what would work in the context of your game.
Has been most of your revenue from like the ads, the rewarded ads?
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. It's probably like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not allowed to share this, but it's like it's a lot. It's most of it, right, by far. Yeah, yeah. But that's mostly because my skills are not in monetization, and I didn't do an amazing job of getting the kind of purchasing of like extra stuff as a big thing, really. And that's also partly because I just didn't design the game with that in mind really from the beginning, which is ideally what you want to do. You want to have a really strong focus on that. But I didn't. I kind of designed the game more from the perspective of just what would be fun to play on mobile.
Yeah. So kind of one of the lessons learned there is like if you were to do a mobile game again, you would kind of design it with the monetization from the beginning, because I feel like these kind of puzzle games, like I wouldn't call it maybe a puzzle game, but like action games like the one you made, it's a bit hard to monetize if there's not like a meta game or PvP or whatever kind of element in there that gets the people to continue, like having some kind of thing that they can sink money into, if you know what I mean. Um,
No, it's true. It's true, and I definitely would. Yes, if I did a mobile game again from scratch, I would definitely design it around the monetization and also the sort of marketing in the sense of just like how appealing an idea it is to a big audience, and then how, and not even necessarily how kind of easy it'd be to monetize, but actually, really, for me, it would be about engagement, like optimizing it for engagement and like retention, like as in getting people to want to get invested in it quickly and want to stick with it. It's actually more important, at least for me, than actually kind of how much money you generate off each person, as it were. It's the actual like just kind of getting someone to keep playing is absolutely vital.
yeah,
And obviously, over a longer term, that does translate to getting more money out of the game anyway. But yeah, it's kind of like the most important thing, really, retention.
totally. I think that's like that in any game, right? Just need to have like people wanting to play the game and then actually enjoying it enough to to continue.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One thing you talked about in one of your, again, maybe a bit older blog posts, but you talked about like that transition of needing to kind of really rethink as working for yourself. Like one of the challenges you said was not just like implementing the game, but also doing things like staying motivated, like staying sane as well, like just working by yourself, motivating yourself constantly. Can you tell us a little bit about like what that was like and what are the biggest takeaways from that kind of lifestyle?
I mean, I think it is definitely a really different thing, isn't it? Kind of working for a studio, working in a team of people, and then suddenly being by yourself, being basically responsible for everything. And like the game doesn't move forward unless you're doing work on it, right?
Hmm.
So there's a lot of pressure, and I think yeah, it kind of could definitely bring out some anxieties there when you're just not sure. Like, is this going to make money? Basically, like, is it going to just come out and no one will care? And then that obviously sort of brings up the question of like, kind of, will I be able to continue doing this? Am I investing in something that is for the future, as it were? So that was really hard, just like not knowing whether it was going to do well or not. And obviously, it helps when you show the game to people and then you get feedback, and that can help you be more motivated. But it definitely was like quite a hard journey to getting that initial alpha finished. It was definitely it was hard work, and also like when you're working on a game by yourself, like it's not all fun tasks. In fact, the fun tasks are probably about 20% of it. Like you're making the core mechanics, and it's can be quite good fun, and things are moving quick. But then like making UI and like creating a progression system and putting in ad networks and all this stuff is just like it's mind-numbing work sometimes, and also just generally hard because you've never done it before. You're having to look up all this documentation for doing stuff that you haven't even seen before. It's hard. It's really hard. So yeah, it's keeping motivated is definitely, I think, one of the most difficult things. And sort of and seeing it through. Really, there's probably a lot of people that do give up before the end because it is hard to see it through to the end, especially if you're running out of money as well.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. What did you kind of tell yourself in those moments of doubt, of like self doubt, maybe? Were you losing motivation?
The most important thing is that it is an experience that you learn from. And the problem is when you're in the middle of it, all you're thinking about is the end goal. Like, I need to finish this game and for it to make money so I can continue doing this, right? And you're just like constantly thinking about that. And it isn't, it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, and it isn't necessarily productive to think like that. Like, the way to think is, what am I learning from doing this? And I kind of didn't have that realization till way late into Hangline's development. And it was actually a friend of mine that just sort of kind of meant or made me think like that. It was a friend of mine that was like a journalist that was occasionally wrote about games, and he was saying that like he'd worked by himself for ages, and it could be really tough at times, but he said like working by himself just meant that he really got better at his craft, and he was just so much faster and productive now than when he started. And yeah, it really made me think about it, and think about the fact that it is a lot about that journey. And if you learn to get way better at making games, especially working by yourself,
Mhm.
then you're going to that's going to be a benefit to you forever, right? Even if you finish your game and it doesn't do well, you've got those skills which you can either take to another job, or maybe you can find a way to give it another try. But
Yeah.
it really is about like trying to focus on the fact that you're going to really learn something and get a lot better at development.
I think that's such a great mindset to take, like that focus on the personal growth. Because, like, looking at you, for example, you're learning programming, art, all these other things, like just from making the game. So obviously, you learned a lot and such. So I really like that. One thing I want to talk about is and we kind of emailed it, talked about it in the email as well, is that you have like some big announcement coming up. You said that it was you're actually not making a mobile game this time, but you're making a new game. So at this point, like, do you want to share more information about it?
Yeah, I can definitely share a little bit more. I mean, to be honest, it's still, being kind of changed and tweaked all the time. Really, that's probably why I haven't announced it yet, because I want to make sure I've got the messaging completely right and the game really figured out in my head. But yeah, it's basically a game about you're sort of trapped in a lab trying to escape from this kind of really weird organism that is just growing constantly out of control and like evolving and transforming. And it's really like a kind of a combination of something like Robotron and then the movie The Thing. So lots of kind of weird, horrible creatures like mutating and lots of kind of yeah, paranoia and desperately trying to escape, but also like quite a heavy emphasis on action and kind of like spatial movement and area denial and so on. But it started off actually in a game jam. Have you ever heard of Pirate Jam?
Pirate Jam. I don't think I've heard of it. No.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like it's not real when you explain it, but it's basically a game jam that takes place on boats in Thailand.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Pretty crazy sounding. Yeah, it's actually American McGee that started it all up. It's gone for about like 4 years or something now. Anyway, I was on one. It's almost a couple of years ago now, and the theme was chaos, and so I made this little prototype of this game that was pretty much a twin stick shooter where the whole thing kind of was built procedurally based on like different equations, and it was really like kind of inspired by Game of Life and those kind of like visualizations that are created by a computer. Like I wanted to kind of make something that was like a really interesting looking kind of visualization that also you could interact with and had gameplay. So that was really like the goal of it. And the easiest way for me that I could think of to do that was doing some sort of twin stick shooter where you're able to fight against a growing thing that is constantly like growing in different directions and sort of like spreading out its tentacles, as it were. And really, the game just kind of evolved very gradually. I originally just wanted to, I thought the concept was interesting, so I just wanted to kind of have a break from Hangline and just make something within a few months. But for some reason, I just kept continuing and making it bigger and bigger, really. So yeah, now I'm kind of like, it's almost, I think I've almost been working on it 2 years, which is kind of embarrassing because, as I say, I haven't even announced it yet. Um, but yeah, it's starting to really take shape. So I'll definitely be yeah, spreading the word about it soon. But yeah, it's been a fun thing to work on. As the game is about something growing out of control, it's kind of ironic that that is literally what has happened with the development.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, was your goal kind of after Hangline to go into like making a PC game, or was that kind of coincidental with the game jam?
Yeah, so like the most logical thing to do would have been stay in mobile, right? That would have been probably the best financial thing to do in some ways. It could have been anyway, at least maybe safely, right? Just work on a sequel, work on a similar game based on all the things you've learned, right? But the thing was, my passion is more in console and PC. Really, that's the games I play the most of, and I kind of thought, I can either continue in mobile and sort of, probably find some success there. But I thought, at some point I'm going to want to transition. And I just thought I may as well just do it now. Like, Hangline was performing, decently well, at least for, the solo dev. So it just made sense to me to just kind of start now and kind of invest in that learning as early as possible, really.
I guess kind of we're at the stage where I tend to like to wrap up things. You actually wrote a blog post called like the 10 things you learned from Hangline. I think you wrote a few postmortem blog posts, but maybe just to recap, like what are kind of the biggest lessons that you've learned so far in your like indie game development journey that you feel like you would pass on if you were trying to give someone advice who wants to kind of do the same thing, or just your like past self, whichever one you prefer in this metaphor?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. There's so many things, but yeah, I guess one thing that really stands out to me is to really choose the game you're going to work on really wisely, and choose it based on how interesting other people might find the concept. So what I mean by that is just thinking from the point of view of discoverability and how marketable the game is, because like that's really one of your biggest challenges. Obviously you've got to make a game that's good, right? But people have got to be interested in it, and that is, that really needs to be built into the design in the sense of making just an appealing game, an appealing concept, because that's going to help so much with discoverability and people finding and yeah, spreading the word about your game, because you've just got such a limited marketing budget as an indie. So that's kind of one of my biggest learnings, to really design the game around thinking about how it will perform, or how it will be attractive and interesting to people. Let's think. Other advice, I would say, yeah, trying to kind of what we touched on before, trying to focus much more on the journey of making a game, and not necessarily putting all your bets on having success with your first game. Just trying to get through it by focusing on what you are going to learn from that, and sort of how you're going to transform as a person and become more knowledgeable doing it, and not trying to focus so much on the game's success. And kind of following on from that, you've also got to think about, like, it's not like the game is released and then, oh, it didn't do well, I'm screwed, go back to a job or whatever. Like there's a lot of things that can be done. Like once a game is out, it doesn't mean to say that if it's not successful, that's the end of that. Like there's lots of work you can do to keep promoting the game, and not just promoting it, but updating it and improving it. There's so much that can happen after that, right? And if it gets picked up by like a famous streamer or whatever, you can have a new lease of life for it. So I think that's also really important as well. Let's see, do I have any other advice? I mean, I think also just kind of obvious stuff, that you really need to be passionate, like,
Yeah.
about games, and really, like, it is hard, and it's going to get you down in places, and you really need to be extremely passionate about games and about making something interesting, and being innovative, really, because otherwise, you will get you potentially will get lost in the crowd, as it were, because there's just so many people making games. You've got to be passionate and dedicated, and really, really need, you really need to have the motivation to finish, and the determination to finish what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, those were all really great points. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing all that awesome information. I think your story is really cool, especially the pirating stuff. That was really something I didn't expect to hear. Is there any place you want people to kind of, check out your new game, if that's already available publicly? I don't know if it will be by the end of this, when this episode comes out, but if people can just follow you somewhere to find out more about stuff that you're doing, like where do you think people should go?
Yeah, probably the easiest place is to find me on Twitter. So that's just at Edform, so EDFORM. Also, you can, if you really want to kind of keep in touch with what's happening and what I'm working on next, you can also go to dinoboss.com. So that's like my company, and there's a newsletter you can sign up on there to find out. Like, you'll get an email basically explaining what I'm working on, or when something's coming out, or if there's some big news.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a review and subscribing on whatever platform you're listening to. For more game development content, head down to moonlightgamedevs.com. I hope you have a great week and join me for the next episode.